Welcome back to Second Chapter Stories. This is a place for those of you who have already lived through many seasons and still feel that life has more to say. Here, we sit with real people, real struggles, and the quiet courage it takes to wake up each morning when the path ahead is uncertain. If you stay with this story until the end, you will not receive easy answers or miracle solutions. You will receive something more honest. The recognition of your own fears in someone else's eyes, a sense of companionship in the lonely hours, and perhaps a small, steady light of possibility that says, "It is not over for you, not yet." Tonight, we begin the story of a man whose life did not follow the script he had written for himself. His name is Harold Whitman. He is 63 years old. He lives alone in a modest apartment in street Petersburg, Florida. A few months ago, bankruptcy wiped away the savings he had spent decades building. Now he moves through his days with a fragile mixture of shame, weariness, and a quiet longing for one more chance. Let us step into his morning. The sun in Florida rises without apology, even on days when the heart feels heavy. On this particular morning, the light slips over the low rooftops and spills into Harold's small balcony, casting long, pale stripes across the worn concrete floor. He stands there in his slippers, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, looking down at the parking lot that lies below like a tired chessboard. There is no rush to his movements anymore. Once, Harold dressed in crisp shirts and left the house before 8 o'clock in the morning, the sound of traffic, a signal that the world needed him. Now the cars come and go without him, and the only appointment on his calendar is the slow turn of the day itself. He lifts the mug to his lips and tastes coffee that has already lost its warmth, the way certain dreams cool when you hold them too long. Beyond the parking lot, a strip of palm trees bends slightly in the breeze, but the scene feels distant, as if viewed through glass. He hears the faint clatter of a neighbor's door, a woman laughing over the phone, the distant whine of a lawnmower starting somewhere down the street. Life is happening, but it seems to be happening a step away from where he stands. Inside the apartment, the air is still. The living room carries quiet traces of who he used to be. A framed certificate from the firm where he worked as an accountant. A bookshelf lined with tax guides, financial manuals, and a few old novels he promised himself he would read one day. On the coffee table, unopened envelopes lie like small white questions. He walks past them, careful not to disturb the neat little stack, as though any movement might wake something he is not ready to face. He moves to the kitchen sink, sets down the mug, and watches a thin circle of coffee glide along the bottom. There is a heaviness in his chest that no doctor has ever measured. It is the weight of numbers that did not work out, of plans that scattered under the pressure of a pandemic, of a courtroom where he stood and admitted that he could not pay what he owed. A man who spent his life balancing accounts could not, in the end, balance his own. Outside, a delivery truck backs up with a sharp, insistent beeping, and Harold flinches as if someone has called his name. For a moment, he imagines that he is needed again, that there is a problem only he can solve. The thought fades quickly, like a shadow sliding off a wall when the light changes. On the far corner of the room sits his phone, face down. It has been ringing less these days, and when it does ring, he often lets it fall silent. His daughter's name appears on the screen now and then, crossing the glass like a small, bright bird. Each time, he tells himself he will call her back when he feels stronger, when he has better news, when he is not standing in the middle of his own failure. Morning stretches into late morning, as it tends to do when there is nowhere particular to be. The clock moves, but the air does not. He opens the window to let in the sounds of the city, hoping they might fill the emptiness inside the apartment. Instead, they only underline it, the rumble of buses, the distant horn of a boat on the bay, footsteps echoing in the hallway as someone climbs the stairs with purpose. Harold sits down in his worn armchair, the fabric thinning where his hands rest. He looks out at the palm trees and the pale blue sky, at the light that falls so generously on everything except the future. He thinks of the word retirement and how it once sounded like a gentle autumn, a slower season of travel, grandchildren, and quiet afternoons in the sun. What he has instead feels more like a long winter that arrived before its time. It would be easy in this moment to say that Harold had given up. But under the layers of fatigue and disappointment, something in him refuses to lie completely still. A memory, a question, a small ember of insistence remains. Is this truly all that is left for me? The morning in street Petersburg looks peaceful from the outside. A soft breeze moves through the trees. The sky is clear, and the world seems to be in order. Yet inside this modest apartment, a man sits at the edge of his own life, wondering whether the second chapter will ever begin. For now, he does not know that something unexpected is waiting just beyond the edges of this quiet day. He only knows the silence, the coffee gone cold, and the faint ache of a heart that has not entirely forgotten how to hope. The afternoon settles over street Petersburg with the heaviness of a curtain drawn too slowly. Inside Harold's apartment, the light shifts from soft gold to a muted, restless gray. It is the hour of the day when the world is neither welcoming nor unkind, merely indifferent. Harold moves through his living room with the quiet steps of someone trying not to disturb the dust that has gathered in the corners of his days. When the knock at the door comes, it is not a real knock, but the soft thud of mail slipping through the slot. He does not hurry. For years, he checked the mail with the precise confidence of a man who knew what to expect. Statements balanced, bills manageable, invitations routine. Now each envelope feels like a small verdict, sealed in thin paper. He bends down slowly, knees stiff, and gathers the envelopes in his hands. There are 3 of them. 2 are familiar advertisements and a medical insurance brochure. The 3rd carries the rigid, unmistakable tone of official notice. He stands at the kitchen counter and opens it with deliberate care, as if neatness might soften whatever truth is waiting inside. The letter unfolds with the cool authority of printed ink. A rent increase. Immediate. Non-negotiable. The room seems to exhale around him, though he cannot. He reads the paragraph again, tracing the numbers with his eyes, willing them to rearrange into something gentler. But the figures stand firm, as unyielding as stone. A rise of this size is not merely inconvenient. It is impossible. He grips the counter to steady himself. The rental market in Florida has tightened like a fist since the pandemic, leaving older renters like him pressed against walls they never saw coming. Moving is nearly out of the question. Bankruptcy still clings to his records like a long shadow, closing doors before he even reaches them. He sets the letter down, but its presence fills the kitchen, spreading through the air like a silent alarm. The refrigerator hums. The ceiling fan turns lazily. Life continues with a casual rhythm that feels almost cruel. Harold pulls out a notebook, the same one he once used to plan budgets for clients. He draws lines, adds numbers, subtracts expenses with the precision that once defined his identity. But every calculation leads to the same dead end, the same quiet disaster. His hands begin to shake. It is a small tremble at first, barely noticeable, then unmistakable, a physical echo of the storm rising inside him. He closes the notebook and presses the heels of his palms against his eyes, as if darkness might offer clarity. He remembers the courtroom months earlier, the wooden benches, the echo of voices, the feeling that he had stepped into a story that could not possibly be his. He remembers signing papers that reduced decades of work to a list of debts and losses. He remembers walking out into the blinding Florida light, unsure how the world could appear so normal when everything inside him had collapsed. And now this. He folds the letter and slips it back into its envelope, but the news clings to him, shaping the air around his shoulders. His apartment, once a modest refuge, now feels tight and constricting walls closing with slow, steady pressure. He walks from room to room, unable to settle, unable to breathe deeply. As the late afternoon heat gathers, heavy and unmoving, he steps outside. The hallway smells faintly of detergent and cooking from neighbors' kitchens. He descends the stairs and pushes open the door into the open air, letting the warm breeze touch his face. He walks without direction, past the row of mailboxes, past the parking lot shimmering with heat, past the palm tree that leans just slightly over the sidewalk. He turns down the street, his pace uneven, his breath shallow. The city continues around him, cars rushing by, bicycles gliding past, conversations drifting across porches. But Harold feels as though he is moving underwater, the world warped by the weight he carries. When he reaches a quiet corner where a bench sits beneath a tree, he stops. He lowers himself slowly and lets the exhaustion settle into his bones. He does not weep, though tears threaten. Instead, he sits very still, staring at the cracked pavement as though it might reveal some hidden door, some route he has not yet seen. The day darkens by degrees. Children's voices fade as families retreat indoors. The streetlights flicker to life, one by one, like distant stars. Harold remains on the bench long after he should have gone home. He is not waiting for anything specific. He simply does not know where else to go with the news that has just entered his life. And though he does not yet realize it, this moment, this quiet unraveling beneath the dim streetlight is the beginning of his turning point. Not a hopeful one, not yet, but a necessary descent, the kind that forces a man to examine the ground beneath his feet before he can rise again. When he finally stands and begins the slow walk back to his apartment, the envelope feels heavier in his pocket than anything he has carried in years. It is the letter that will not wait, the crisis that insists on being met, and somewhere in the deepening dusk, a path he cannot yet see has already begun to open. The next morning breaks without ceremony. A pale, thin light presses through the blinds of Harold's bedroom, drawing faint stripes across the rumpled sheets. He lies awake long before he rises, listening to the distant calls of birds and the low hum of a city slowly gathering itself for the day. Sleep has been shallow, more adrift through restless thoughts than a refuge. By 8 o'clock in the morning, he is standing at his window, watching a pair of neighbors carry tote bags to their car. Their movements seem purposeful, steady. He envies that rhythm, that simple sense of belonging to the forward motion of a day. Instead, he feels suspended, caught between yesterday's blow and whatever uncertain calculation comes next. The letter remains on the kitchen counter. He does not touch it, but its presence fills the apartment like a soundless ticking, urging him to act, though he has no idea where to begin. When he finally steps outside, the morning air is cool, touched with the faint scent of the sea. He walks toward downtown street, Petersburg, letting the city pull him along. His steps are not confident, but they are at least steps, and that feels like a small victory. The community center comes into view, a modest building with faded posters taped to its windows. He has passed it many times, but seldom entered. Today, though, something nudges him inside, perhaps the desire to sit somewhere that does not hold the echoes of his own thoughts. The lobby is simple: linoleum floors, folding chairs, a bulletin board crowded with flyers. A handful of older adults sit in small groups, talking softly. Their voices drift across the room, mentions of rising medication costs, of children who live thousands of miles away, of the sense of being left behind by a world that has grown impatient with age. Harold stands near the doorway, listening. These are strangers, yet their words feel hauntingly familiar. He feels both the comfort of recognition and the sting of shared vulnerability. "Are you here for the budgeting class?" a volunteer asks gently, her tone warm but not intrusive. He nods. Partly out of politeness, partly because the idea of sitting down with numbers tools he once understood feels like a lifeline he can still grasp. He takes a seat in a room where fluorescent lights hum overhead. At the front, an instructor begins discussing ways to manage reduced income, how to navigate rent increases, how to access local assistance programs. The information is practical, helpful even, but Harold finds himself drifting, not out of disinterest, but out of a growing realization these numbers no longer obey him. The spreadsheets, the tidy margins, the reassuring logic he once used to steady himself, none of it feels accessible now. He stares at the instructor's hand as she circles figures on a whiteboard, and a wave of humiliation rises, quiet but suffocating. His throat tightens. He grips his pen too hard. The room feels warm, close. He excuses himself before the class ends. Outside, the sun has climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. He walks without direction, his breath unsteady, until he finds himself at an empty bus stop. There, with no one nearby to witness, the weight he has been carrying presses too deeply to contain. He sits on the metal bench, elbows on his knees, and allows his shoulders to sag in a way he never would have permitted years ago. He does not cry, but something inside him bends dangerously near breaking. The truth is stark. He has lived his entire adulthood as a man who could solve problems. Now, at 63, he feels unable to solve his own. A bus approaches, its brakes sighing as it slows. He lifts his head, but does not stand. He cannot summon the energy to step into its flow of passengers and destinations. When the bus pulls away, he watches the trail of exhaust blur in the sunlight, as if marking the distance between who he was and who he is now. On the walk home, he stares at the ground more than the sky. Phone calls go unanswered. One from his daughter appears, then disappears. The silence he has chosen has become another burden, yet he cannot bring himself to lift it. By early afternoon, he is back in his apartment. He sits in his armchair, the fabric warm from the sunlight that has moved across the room while he was gone. He clasps his hands together, trying to still the tremble. There is fear, slow, persistent, practical, but beneath the fear lies something sharper, the suspicion that he may never regain what he lost, that he may never again feel capable or necessary or steady. He closes his eyes and inhales slowly, as though testing whether his breath can carry him through the remainder of the day. He does not know, not yet, that life is preparing a small, unexpected opening. Something unremarkable to the world, but profound enough to shift the course of his days. A spark waiting at the edge of this heaviness, for now there is only the quiet, the hum of the ceiling fan, and a man sitting alone, trying to understand how to begin again when the ground beneath him feels uncertain and thin. Late afternoon settles over the apartment complex like a thin, warm veil. The sun, lowering itself toward the horizon, casts a soft amber glow across the walls, turning even the worn stucco into something briefly gentle. Harold steps outside with a small bundle of flattened cardboard boxes in his arms, remnants of old appliances, old deliveries, old intentions. He moves unhurriedly, as though conserving energy for some unknown trial that might be waiting beyond the day. The alley behind the building is quiet at this hour. A pair of ibises pick through the grass near the dumpster, their white feathers glowing faintly in the sun's last light. The air smells of warm concrete and a hint of sea salt carried from the bay. As he approaches the dumpster, something catches the corner of his eye. A shape leaning against the metal bin, half-shadowed, almost apologetic in its posture. A bicycle, or what used to be one. The faded blue frame is chipped, the chain slack and rusted. One tire hangs limp, the other buckled. It looks abandoned, forgotten, cast aside without ceremony. Harold pauses, the boxes still pressed against his chest. The sight stirs something unexpected, quiet, almost tender. A memory rises, unbidden but welcome, like the faint scent of an old season. He is 10 years old again, standing in the dim garage of his childhood home. His father, sleeves rolled up, leans over a workbench scattered with tools. There is sawdust on the floor, a radio humming softly, and a blue bicycle, his bicycle turned upside down so the wheels spin freely. His father's hands guide his smaller ones, teaching him how to tighten a bolt, how to listen for the click that means it is secure. In that garage, the world felt simple. There was always a way forward, always something that could be fixed if only you took the time to understand its parts. The memory leaves a warmth in his chest that he has not felt in months, maybe years. He sets the cardboard down quietly and steps closer to the bicycle. The metal is rough beneath his fingers, the paint mottled by sun and rain, but the structure is still there, solid, honest, waiting. He hesitates. It is, after all, only a discarded bike. Taking it home makes no practical sense. And yet something in the stillness urges him forward, as if the past has reached through a narrow doorway and touched his shoulder. Almost without thinking, he grips the handlebars and lifts. The bike is lighter than he expects, the back wheel clicking faintly as he maneuvers it away from the dumpster. He wheels it across the alley, through the side path, and up to his apartment door. Each step feels strangely deliberate, as though he is carrying not a broken object, but a small fragment of a life he once knew. Inside, the apartment greets him with its steady quiet. He leans the bike against the wall and studies it under the soft, fading light that drifts through the balcony window. He crouches beside it, a task he has not performed in decades. Dust comes off easily beneath his palm. The chain, though rusted, is intact. The pedals, stiff but promising, resist with a familiar tension. He reaches for a damp cloth and begins to wipe away the grime. The motion is slow, unhurried. Each stroke steadies him, as though he is smoothing not just metal, but the ragged edges of his own spirit. Minutes stretch into something resembling peace. The simple work gives his hands a purpose his heart has been missing. There is no pressure here. No expectation, only the quiet restoration of something that deserves a second chance. The room grows dim as evening gathers. He switches on a small lamp, its warm light pooling gently around him. The rest of the world recedes: the rent increase, the letters, the empty bus stop, the fear. All of it softens under the glow. And then, somewhere deep inside, a subtle shift occurs. Not a revelation, not a triumph, just a flicker, a spark, the sense that perhaps he is not entirely lost, that perhaps the man who once solved problems, who once repaired the broken, still exists beneath the layers of worry and wear. He sits back on his heels, breathing more evenly than he has in days. The bicycle, though far from whole, stands before him as a quiet companion. A reminder that worn things, rusted, discarded things can find their way into use again. Night deepens outside. A soft wind rustles the palm fronds. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter floats through the warm air. Harold rests his hand on the cool metal frame. He does not know why this moment feels so significant. He only knows it does. He turns off the lamp, leaving the room in a gentle half-darkness, and whispers into the quiet, not a full sentence, only the beginning of one. It is enough. A faint ember glows within him, and though he cannot yet see the road ahead, he feels the first fragile hint that a new direction has begun to take shape. The morning that follows arrives with a clarity Harold has not felt in some time. It is not confidence, nothing so bold. It is simply a sense of movement, as though something inside him has shifted from stillness to a quiet, deliberate turning. The blue bicycle leans against the wall of his living room, catching a sliver of sunlight that slips through the blinds. Its presence fills the apartment with an unexpected companionship, as if the room itself is breathing a little differently. He spends the early hours cleaning each metal joint with care, the way a gardener tends to the first fragile sprout after winter. There is purpose in the work, and more than that, there is calm. He oils the chain, wipes away rust flecks, and tightens the bolts until the bike begins to resemble a promise rather than a relic. When he steps back at last, the frame gleams faintly, holding just enough shine to stir something hopeful. That small glow carries him to the flea market on Saturday morning. The sun is bright, already warm, and the market buzzes with gentle chaos vendors, unfolding tarps, families with iced drinks, the call of gulls circling overhead. He wanders through rows of stalls selling everything from garden tools to seashell wind chimes, scanning each table with the practical eye he thought he had lost. At a booth cluttered with old bolts, reflectors, and mismatched bike seats, an elderly vendor with weathered hands glances at the worn tire in Harold's grip. "Restoring an old cruiser?" the man asks, with a knowing tilt of his head. Harold nods, a quiet spark of pride rising within him. "I found it near my building." "Well," the vendor says, leaning his elbows on the table, "you fix it up, someone out there will want it. Folks around here love a second-hand bike, might even fetch you a little money." The words settle over Harold like a soft awakening. Sell it! The idea feels almost too large, too daring. But he carries it with him as he picks out spare parts, as he hands over a few wrinkled bills, as he walks back through the sunlit aisles of the market with a bag of possibility in his hand. Back home, he works through the afternoon on his balcony. The light shifts from bright gold to a calmer shade, the shadows lengthening across the tiled floor. By evening, the bike stands upright, wheels straight, the handlebar tape replaced, the chain humming quietly under his touch. It is not perfect, not yet, but it is undeniably transformed. He photographs it from several angles, trying to capture the honest work he has done. Then he sits down with his laptop, the screen glowing softly against the encroaching dusk. He struggles with the listing, what words to use, what price to ask, how to present himself as someone trustworthy in a world that now seems to rely on digital reputations he does not possess. He types slowly, carefully. He uploads the photos. He presses post. For a moment, he allows himself to imagine what it would feel like if someone responded, not just to the bike, but to the effort it represents, the small flicker of competence he has managed to coax back to life. But the hours pass quietly. No messages come. Late in the evening, he checks again. Nothing. A thread of doubt begins to unspool inside him. Fragile at first, then quicker, sharper, he lowers the price, hoping the change will draw someone's eye. Morning arrives. Still nothing, until finally a notification. He opens it with cautious hope. The message is abrupt, suspicious. "Why are you selling it so cheap? Looks fake. New account with no reviews? Feels like a scam." The words land with unexpected force. Not because of cruelty, he has endured harsher things in recent years, but because they strike at the softest part of him, the part trying to lift itself up again. He closes the laptop too quickly, the screen snapping shut with a dull sound. The apartment seems to dim around him, the earlier light fading from his thoughts. For a long while he sits very still, hands folded in his lap, breathing shallowly. His heart feels heavy, warmer in places that should be cool. The old narrative returns. Too old, too slow, too late. The world has moved on. He looks at the bicycle, its blue frame catching a faint shimmer, as though waiting for him to decide what it will become. In the hush of the room, a new voice, quiet, steady, pushes through the doubt. It is not triumphant. It is not defiant. It is simply firm. Not yet. I am not giving up yet. He rises from the chair, the weight of his body pressing into the floorboards. He touches the bicycle once more, running his fingers along the curve of the handlebars, grounding himself in the feel of the work he has already done. He does not know how to succeed at this. He only knows that the act of trying feels strangely necessary, like breathing after holding one's breath for too long. Outside, the evening deepens. The sky moves toward indigo, and a soft wind rustles through the palms. It is a night that holds no promises, yet somehow holds room for them. The path ahead remains difficult, but the work, this simple, honest work, has begun to teach him something he had almost forgotten. That rebuilding a life does not happen in triumphs. It happens in quiet choices, in stubbornness, in the willingness to rise again after a stumble no one else even saw. And so he stays standing beside the bicycle, letting the last of the daylight touch him, uncertain but unbroken, ready almost for whatever comes next. Dawn arrives gently, almost hesitantly, as though unsure whether Harold is ready to receive it. The sky carries a muted palette, soft gray at the edges, pale gold forming slowly, like a thought taking shape. Harold stands on his balcony, leaning on the railing, the metal cool beneath his palms. He has slept little. The disappointment of the previous day clung to him through the night, a restless companion that would not release its grip. Yet something else has joined the quiet of this early hour, not hope exactly, but a stillness that feels less like defeat and more like contemplation. A pause before choosing a direction. Across the courtyard, a row of palms stirs with the first breath of morning wind. Their fronds rustle softly, like a distant whisper urging him to listen. The world, despite everything, has begun another day. He inhales deeply, letting the cool air fill his lungs, letting the slow light guide his eyes upward. He thinks of the message that accused him of dishonesty. He thinks of the long months of unraveling bankruptcy, rising rent, unanswered calls, the shrinking of a life once full of purpose. He thinks of the rusted bicycle he found near the dumpster and the quiet, steady work that had brought it back to life. Something shifts inside him with the precision of a bolt being tightened, a small but decisive click. He is tired of shrinking, tired of stepping backward, of letting the world decide his worth. He does not know what shape his future will take, but he knows he cannot return to the silence that swallowed him last year. He straightens his posture, feeling the unfamiliar weight of determination settle over him. Then, with a resolve he had nearly forgotten how to summon, he steps back inside and turns on the lamp in the corner of the room. The warm glow spreads outward, chasing shadows from the edges of the apartment. He opens his laptop. The screen flickers to life. This time, he does not wince. He searches for free online classes, anything related to repair work, small-scale business skills, community resources for older adults. The list is overwhelming at first. Hundreds of links scattered like pebbles on a path he has never walked. But he clicks anyway. A workshop titled "Starting a Repair Microbusiness for Retirees" draws his attention. He reads through the description twice, a quiet thrill moving through him. There are lessons on pricing, customer trust, local outreach, even instructions on photographing work for beginners. He signs up without hesitation. The confirmation email arrives instantly, its tone warm and encouraging. He reads it slowly, savoring the unfamiliar sensation, the feeling of taking a step forward, however small. Next, he searches for community organizations. A senior-focused nonprofit offering volunteer opportunities appears on his screen. They refurbish bikes and walkers for low-income families. His fingers hover above the keyboard as he considers how vulnerable it feels to reach out, to announce himself as someone willing but inexperienced. Then he types a polite message, a brief introduction, an offer to help, even if only for a few hours each week. The act of sending it surprises him not for its difficulty, but for the relief that follows, as though a weight has shifted from his chest to the open air. He sits back, exhaling as sunlight finally breaks cleanly across the floor. The blue bicycle stands by the balcony door, its frame touched by the first true light of morning. It looks almost proud, as though it knows it played a part in this turning. Harold walks toward it and rests a hand on the handlebars. His touch is steady, calmer than it was yesterday. He thinks of his father again, of the quiet patience in that old garage, the belief that anything broken could be understood, examined, restored. Perhaps the same is true now. Perhaps a life, even at 63, is not a closed book, but a machine with pieces that can still be adjusted, cleaned, rebuilt. The fear remains inside him. He does not deny it. It stays like a shadow just behind the glow, but fear is no longer steering him. He feels it shift, pressed gently aside by something sturdier. Courage does not roar. Today it arrives as a whisper, a choice made at dawn. He opens the balcony door and lets the morning air enter fully, fresh and salt-kissed. Somewhere in the distance, the city begins to stir, car doors shutting, a delivery truck rumbling to life, gulls calling toward the water. Harold watches the sky brighten and feels an unusual steadiness in his chest. He has chosen his direction. Piece by piece, he will rebuild his footing. He will learn. He will offer his hands where they are needed. He will give his days structure again, shape again, purpose again. The sun lifts higher, and the apartment warms. Today is not a conclusion. It is an opening. The quiet beginning of a new chapter, written not by circumstance, but by courage, the kind that rises slowly, like dawn, across a life that had nearly forgotten its own light. Late afternoon settles over, street, Petersburg with the soft warmth of a fading summer. The light drapes itself gently across the neighborhood park, turning the grass a deeper shade of green and catching on the edges of the playground swings. Harold walks slowly across the path, a restored bicycle at his side, its blue frame polished, its tires newly inflated, its chain moving with an easy glide. Children run in unpredictable arcs around him, their laughter rising like birds startled into flight. At the far end of the park, a small charity booth is being set up. Bright banners flutter in the wind, and volunteers arrange snacks, bottled water, and a line of modest donations, books, backpacks, shoes, and a few well-used bicycles. Harold hesitates before reaching the table, one hand resting lightly on the seat of the cruiser. He feels the familiar flutter of doubt in his chest, but it is quieter now, softened by something steadier. A young volunteer greets him with a smile that is warm without being insistent. "Oh, that is beautiful," she says, her eyes widening as she looks at the bike. "Is this your donation?" Harold clears his throat, surprised by how unsteady his voice feels. "Yes, I restored it myself." The words leave his mouth with a weight he did not expect. Pride, humble but real. The volunteer nods with genuine admiration. This will make a child very, very happy. And as if summoned by her words, a boy no older than 8 wanders near, skin tanned by the Florida sun, a small backpack hanging crookedly from one shoulder. He stops in front of the bicycle, head tilted slightly, wonder blooming across his face. His fingers hover inches from the handlebars, hesitant, reverent. "Go on," the volunteer encourages him softly. "You can try it." The boy looks to Harold as though seeking permission. Harold nods. The child climbs onto the seat with careful balance. His feet find the pedals. The wheels begin to turn. Slowly at first, then faster. The boy glides across the park path, the wind lifting his hair, his laughter ringing in the air like the pure sound of something beginning. Harold watches, unable to look away. A swell rises in him, not triumph, not relief, but a deep, quiet gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he feels that he has given something of value. Not perfect, not grand, simply real. As the boy circles back to the booth, he looks up at Harold with bright, earnest eyes. "Thank you," he whispers. Harold feels the words settle inside him, steadying him like a hand placed gently on the heart. Word begins to spread. In the slow, winding way, news travels through neighborhoods. A man who fixes old bikes. A man who helps where he can. A man with tools and patience. Within days, 2 neighbors knock on his door, one holding a bike with a flat tire, the other asking if he could look at a chain that refuses to stay in place. They offer small payments. One brings him a bag of oranges from her backyard tree. Another leaves a handwritten thank you card on his doormat. The world, which had felt so tight and narrowing, begins to widen ever so slightly. Not enough to dissolve the uncertainty of the future, his finances remain precarious, his rent still threatens, and he wonders how to reconnect with his daughter after months of silence. But something has changed in the structure of his days. He wakes with direction. He works with purpose. He listens again to the sounds of the morning as though they belong to him. In the evenings, he sits on his balcony with a soft cloth in one hand, polishing the metal of whatever bike waits beside him. The palms sway. The sky slips from orange to rose to a gentle violet. The world keeps its quiet rhythm, and Harold finds himself moving in step once more. He is not healed, not solved, not finished. But he is turning towards something that feels like belonging, like usefulness, like the faint but steady hum of possibility. As he walks home from the park that first evening, the sun dipping behind the rooftops, the path unfolds before him with a kind of grace. He senses that more challenges lie ahead, the kind that test a man's patience, his resolve, his sense of self. Yet he does not shrink from the thought. He carries it with him like a tool in a pocket. The wheels of his life, long still, are moving again, slowly, deliberately, toward whatever tomorrow has the courage to offer. Thank you for spending this time with Harold and with us. If this story touched you, moved you, or reminded you of someone you love, I invite you to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Second Chapter Stories. There are more journeys waiting, quiet, real, and full of the human resilience we all carry within us.